I'm so glad you joined us this Holy Week as we gather together and hear these words at the outset. So this past Sunday, instead of observing the traditional Palm Sunday, we observed something called Palm Passion Sunday. What's the difference between the two, you might wonder? Well, Palm Sunday is that day on the Christian calendar when we celebrate Jesus' joyous entry into Jerusalem. It's that one moment when it seemed as if the whole world finally got who Jesus was and affirmed his call. What a moment to celebrate. But Palm Passion Sundays are a little different in nature. Now, of course, they begin with the joy of Palm Sunday, but typically about halfway through, Palm Passion Sunday services shift gear so that they can begin to include a taste of what Paul Harvey called the rest of the story. In other words, they touch on the pain, suffering, and death that followed that exuberance of Palm Sunday. That leads me to a second question, and perhaps the most important question for the day for us to consider. Why on earth would anyone choose to observe Palm Passion Sunday instead of just focusing on the palm part? Why bother to bring up things like suffering and death at a time when we could focus exclusively on the much needed topic of joy? Something we desperately need these days as we live in a world at war and in the presence of continued viruses. Why would we do that? Well, before I answer the question, I'm going to read this morning's featured portion of the Passion story. And when I finish reading this selection, I want to bring us back together and see if we can answer those questions for ourselves. So here now, Luke chapter 23, verses 13 through 24, and I'll be reading from the Common English Bible. Then Pilate called together the chief priests, the rulers, and the people, and he said to them, "You brought this man before me as one who is misleading the people. I have questioned him in your presence and found nothing in this man's conduct that provides a legal basis for the charges that you have brought against him. Neither did Herod, because Herod returned him to us. He's done nothing that deserves death. Therefore, I'll have him whipped. Then let him go." But with one voice, they shouted, "Away with this man! Release Barabbas to us." Barabbas had been thrown into prison because of a riot that had occurred in the city and for murder. Pilate addressed them again because he wanted to release Jesus. But they kept shouting out, "Crucify him! Crucify him!" For the third time, Pilate said to them, "Why? What wrong has he done? I've found no legal basis for the death penalty in his case. Therefore, I will have him whipped and then let him go." They were adamant, shouting their demand that Jesus be crucified. Their voices won out. Pilate issued his decision to grant their request. He released the one they asked for, who had been thrown into prison because of a riot and murder, but he handed Jesus over to their will. And thus ends the sacred reading. So, friends, let's dig in now and see if we can answer the questions I raised at the outset. When I was a child in the 1970s, most Protestant churches would hold Palm Sunday services that were full of joyous affirmations of Jesus and our Christian faith. And since they were Protestant, very few of those churches held midweek services. They justified it by saying those services on Thursday and Friday are just for Catholics, right? And folks would then again assemble the following Sunday for their joyous Easter celebration. So Protestant clergy began to notice that pattern, and during the 1980s and 90s in particular, they began to add Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday services. But despite the work of the clergy, the majority of lay people in Protestant churches continued to ignore Maundy, Thursday, and Good Friday. It's because they had been trained for generations to jump from one joyous celebration to the next. And they had no desire whatsoever to delve into the complicated topics that the rest of Holy Week raised. One of the megachurches in the Midwest, in fact, picked up on this obsession with joy and avoidance of pain, suffering, and death, and they went one step further. They eliminated the cross in their sanctuary. They did so by saying that the path to church growth was by giving people what they wanted. And people wanted joy, they said, not sorrow. And because some of the churches that adopted their approach grew rapidly and had thousands and thousands of members, sadly, other small churches began to follow their lead. And in that rush to give people what they wanted, they completely forgot to give people what they actually needed. Why do I say that? Why would I say that people desperately need to hear the parts of the story about pain, suffering, and death that come before Easter? Well, here's why. If you were to ask me what the most distinctive element of our Christian faith is, here's what I would say. I would say that our faith has the audacity to look at the whole of human experience, both the joy and the sorrow, the good and bad times, and that, my friends, is what sets our faith apart. For you see, when it comes to things like pain and sorrow, there are some faith traditions and spiritual paths that suggest we have to overcome those feelings of pain and suffering by simply detaching from them. Other faith traditions will say that, yes, pain and sorrow are necessary evils, if you will. They are either difficult lessons that one must learn as the consequence of one's poor choice, they might say, or they could counter, they're things that you push through in order to build character. But our Christian faith takes a different approach than all of those. For it has the audacity to tell us that pain, suffering, and death are absolutely essential aspects of what it means to live a full and complete life, a life of faith. In fact, this Holy Week that we are in the midst of, we are once again reminded that there is absolutely no way that you can arrive at the fullness of Easter's joy unless you have traveled along with Jesus through those difficult patches, through things like betrayal, trials, crucifixion, and even ultimately death. Only then, when we have gone those places, after we have looked at the fullness of life, can we begin to really appreciate what this resurrection, what this new life is all about. And you see, when Christian churches began to pare down or edit Jesus' story by skipping from Palm Sunday to Easter in order to put more butts in the pew, there was a tragic theological consequence. For by getting rid of all the references to pain, suffering, and death, people began to actually think that they too could lead a life absent of those things. And those churches that caved in and preached something called the prosperity gospel told folks in their pews that if they were just faithful enough, they could skip over all of the pain and suffering in life. They told their folks that if you followed Jesus correctly, then you would never have to live through those things yourself. And it set millions of followers of Jesus on the path to gut-wrenching faith crises when the inevitable experiences of pain, suffering, and death came into their lives, for they had no idea how to process those feelings. For you see, when we hear both sides of the Easter story, the suffering and the joy, the death and the resurrection, then we begin to realize what I believe is one of the most fundamental truths of our faith. That being that nothing, I repeat, nothing is outside of our faith journey. For even those most brutal moments that bring us to our knees and shake us to the core, those moments like when Jesus stood before the crowd as they shouted, "Crucify him," they are the very moments that can help transform us and take us to new places that we would have never even dreamed of on our own. So on a Sunday and a Holy Week, when it would have been so easy to celebrate just one side of the story, I celebrate all those Christian communities out there who have had the courage to celebrate both sides. May we use the experience of examining both sides to give us the strength to face the challenges that lie before us, and the joy to celebrate what lies beyond both of those sides, which is expressions of life everlasting. This Easter season, may we find our way there. Amen.